Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our final seminar in the Digital Health Commercialization Seminar Series, which is being co-sponsored by the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health and Brown Technology Innovations. My name is Allison Seeley. I am the project coordinator for educational initiatives at the Center for Digital Health, where one of our strategic priorities is helping to develop the future of the digital health workforce through programming and events like the one that you are all joining us for today. I'm going to be one of your moderators, and I will let our other moderator introduce herself in just a bit. In this seminar series, we've been exploring the process of bringing digital health innovations to market. We've had speakers over the last month with expertise on intellectual property, regulatory pathways, market access, the list goes on. So whether you're someone who is ready to pursue commercialization, or if you are just considering the pathways for scaling your innovation, we do hope that you have been able to take away some insights through the series, and will continue to do so today. To stay up to date on all of the upcoming programs related to digital health, consider joining our email listserv, which I will chat to everyone right now. By joining our listserv, you will get some newsletters and some announcements of other series coming up. Before jumping into the actual presentation and before we introduce our speaker, I would like to let everyone know that this session is being captioned. And so to access captions, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window or access the live transcript via the link I'm chatting now. But those are all of the logistic items. I'm going to go ahead and let my co-moderator introduce herself and then introduce our guest speaker.
All right. Thanks, Allison. Hi, my name is Melissa Simon, and I'm a Director of Business Development with Brown Tech Innovations, which is Brown's Technology Transfer Office. And I'm your co-moderator for today. So for our final session in the series, we're thrilled to welcome Aidan Petrie. So Aidan is a founding partner of NEMIC, the New England Medical Innovation Center, New England's MedTech Venture Studio, and he's also a fellow of the provost at RISD, focused on intersections between user-centered design and healthcare. He co-founded the Magpie X MedTech Accelerator Fund, is a member of Cherrystone Angels, and was a founding partner of Zymedica. Presentation will be about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll close out with about 10 to 15 minutes. Feel free to add questions into the chat, and we can moderate them, sort of monitor them as we go along and address them at the end. So welcome, Aidan, and I'll let you take it from here.
Hi there. Great to have everybody on board here. I'm going to just start by sharing the screen, and let's go here, and we will go up from here. So everybody can see that, I hope. And okay, so I was asked to talk about pitching and putting together pitch decks, which as some or probably all of you know at this point, a pitch deck has become the sort of the surrogate in this business for a business plan. A little bit about me. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller so I can't see myself. My degree in London was I was a product engineer by my undergraduate, went to RISD, did industrial design, and then through various partnerships found myself to be a serial entrepreneur, which I think I've started 17 companies, but I've actually started 27, I counted the other day. And these are all sorts of different things, and it's a funky, long journey that's worth telling over a beer. I've got a lot of IP developed over that time. Most relevantly to this, I founded and led Zymedica, which is, I think I can say it's the world's largest medical device outsourced developer. So we develop medical devices, which I sold about 6 years ago and then resold a year ago, which was satisfactory. And in looking around for something that I thought would be useful, I partnered with a lady called Lydia Shin, and we started the New England Medical Innovation Center. That has led us also to start a small fund, and that's a nonprofit, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we've then progressed that to start a small fund that is focused on seed investment in the regulated medtech space. At NEMIC, we call ourselves a medtech venture studio. The reason for that is that words like accelerator for digital health and medtech are not particularly relevant. You don't want to go, you don't want to accelerate, you want to arrive on time. So this is sort of, has a planning component, which is really all built around arriving, doing what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it. We provide, we've got a place, we're about 200 yards from the digital health center, and we've got a room which I think now has, what are we like, 13 companies in it. A number of them are out of, a lot of them out of Brown, out of from the local area. We've got a bunch of different companies working here. Our strength is education, and the reason we set this up was that nobody teaches anybody how to bring a regulated product to market, and it's hard, and it's something that you can't do alone. And so we researched very heavily and put together a program, which I think Melissa has actually been through, and some of it's heavy lifting, but it is a pretty comprehensive guide to how to bring a medical or regulated device to market, and focus solely on a group, a vertical of the FDA called CDRH. We do a lot of advisory services, so we end up talking to lots of companies all the time, from locally, regionally, all over the country, and these days all over the world. And then we put on various events and seminars and do speaking, and we're running office hours here in Providence. We're doing them up in Cambridge. We do them at the Harvard iLab, where we're speaking to companies there. At the end of the day, what we're about is actually helping companies raise money in this space, and it is incredibly worthwhile. Everything that you online for this call are doing is incredibly worthwhile, but it is also challenging. You're going to be raising a lot of money. If you decide to take your ventures forward, you're going to raise a lot of money, and you will have quite large business opportunities. So that's sort of the end game for us. Regarding, we work in, everything we work in is governed by CDRH or is close to it. And that means that the bulk of the product, we're in either devices, they're diagnostics, or they're digital products of one sort or another. And as you probably know, the digital health arena is a very, very fast growing one. It is, there's a huge focus there. And right now, I think we said yesterday we're working with 40 to 50 companies, of which probably a half of them are either connected product, which means there is a device and a system attached to that device, or they are or they're pure models, which are pure digital health, which may or may not be regulated, but they are providing some service into the healthcare community. And these ones may not have a device associated with them. So that's probably half of what we're doing. And probably half of those companies that are currently in our programs are either at the medical school, they're at Lifespan, they're at Brown on a faculty, they're Brown faculty, or they may be undergraduate. Okay, so let's get into the bulk of this. So a pitching deck, as I said at the beginning, the pitch deck is something that all of you need to become very familiar with. It's going to be your friend, and if you're going to take your business forward, there are companies here that I have looked at their pitch decks so many times, and I've watched it evolve over 2-3 years. I just contacted a chap from Tufts who's now raising, I think he's raising 22 million or something. And that was 3 years ago that we first looked at his deck. And it's a live document that will stay with you. What it does is it lays out your business hypothesis. It is something that will contain and organize information. It explains data. It articulates what you know that you don't know. And it makes a case for investment. I think just one very important thing here is that a pitch deck is not something that any investor will invest in that deck alone. Your purpose of your deck is to hook an investor such that they become interested in what you're doing. And from there, you will be moved to diligence. And we give a whole diligence is essentially a deep dive into your business assumptions, but the backdrop and construct for that is the deck. All right, and with that, understand who you're pitching to. The bulk, I pulled these statistics from somewhere, the bulk of the folk that you will be talking to are going to be between 55 and 70. A lot of them are out of the C-suite. They are significantly more male right now, and that is changing somewhat, which is great, but it is still largely a male domain. Likely they have no background in digital health, and it is highly unlikely that they have a background in your specific arena of healthcare. They are usually not scientists, and they are often not physicians with the knowledge of your field. So what does that mean? That means that you need to speak in a common language. You need to be efficient and uncomplicated. You need to use analogies where they are relevant, and you need to practice like crazy, such that the getting the right flow is really, really important. And I think we've got a layout for the deck that I'm about to go through. So I'm not going to go through everything today. We've picked where I suspect you are all at, which is that you will have some of the framework in place, and I'm going to focus on that. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge, for those who've done this many times before, that there are pieces that we are dropping out of this because it would go on forever, and we have a very good class if anybody wants to take it that we can go through in some detail. So there are some bits that I think are critical in order to get the framework in place. And typically, what I will also say is that use a typical flow, and this is a very typical flow. And the reason for that is that you want to have a construct that the listeners are able to drop into and understand and absorb very well. If you're not working in the regulated fields, if you're not working on digital health, your decks can often be a lot simpler. But in this case, because of the arena, and because it is a little bit asymmetric in the way that it works, having a standard deck format is important. And so this shows the main pieces that we're going to go through today. All right, so decks, there are multiple decks, and I am basically going to lay out the 7-minute pitch, but I want to be clear that typically you will have an executive summary. A full investor pitch will typically have a great deal more on the science. I love trying to help entrepreneurs reduce down to an elevator pitch. There is nothing better than becoming really succinct with what you're all about. And so to go through the practice of getting yourself down to a 5-floor elevator pitch or a 1-minute pitch is really, really good practice. And then there are longer ones when you're in front of angels, they might be 15 minutes and you'll get a Q&A and so forth. So this is what we're going to go through is a fairly standard 7-minute pitch. All right, here we go. So you're going to be standing in front of people who you want to essentially become interested in what you're doing. You want them to engage with you, and so have a decent logo and have a something, a name or tagline that will generate some interest. Have your name on it, have it dated, etc., etc. Look and feel in decks is really important, and there is nothing. We looked at one yesterday, and it was like, this doesn't look like it is serious. And you're in a serious field. You're in the business of helping people, of hopefully saving lives or improving lives and so forth. So the look and feel of decks is critical, and don't shirk on that, and don't think that you're necessarily the world's best designer. There are people who do this extremely well. The executive slide summary is the lean in, and what I'm not a particularly politically correct person, so I'll basically say that you want to start with somebody saying that you want to wake everybody up. You've got to make a statement that is important right from the get-go. And a lot of times, having been through hundreds of pitches, you want to have something where everybody's eyes come up and they look at you and they look at the screen and they put down their phones and they're like, okay, I'm engaged. So your executive summary slide should be impactful and meaningful and short, and it should say something that is essentially engaging. Bear in mind the people in the room, if you're starting with angels, these are high risk, high return investors. And so part of that narrative has to speak to that. You are not going to be there solving a small problem. You're going to be there to solve a big problem. So when we come to the problem, breaking that problem down into something that can be understood quickly and easily, and not just understood, but a realization that it is impactful. In the healthcare business, everybody knows somebody who's had something. Everybody knows somebody who's been sick. Everybody knows somebody who has had something happen that has caused them to engage with the healthcare system. And so to be able to articulate that in a way that is immediately clear, large, impactful, serious, some numbers that relate to the industry, whether it's untoward outcomes or costs or whatever the components are. The problem needs to be, again, something that is reduced to the point that it can be absorbed and understood quickly. And very often here, you will see an empathetic story, something where the people essentially say, yeah, I understand that, I have that. I know my mom had that issue or whatever it might be. So something that is engaging. And the flow here is that, well, you just explained the problem, so you better have a solution. And that solution initially is a direct action back to that problem. We're going to do this, 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 and this, which will satisfy these issues. It is not a technical slide. It is not a science slide. This is really the reflection of that problem. In this business, the value proposition is really, really important. And what is interesting in healthcare is that because of the way that much of the payments are made, is that there are multiple sides to value. So if you make me as a patient better, quicker, that's a tremendous value to me. If I can exit the hospital or not go to hospital, you've done something preventative or whatever it might be, to a patient, that is really, really important. You've reduced the cost of my care and so forth, but they are only one component. And then you look at the provider side, and if the provider, you've reduced costs, you've improved outcomes, you've allowed for a physician time or a nurse time to be better utilized and so forth, you provide better data, etc. Understanding who are part of the value proposition are usually there's a patient, there's a physician, there's a provider, an institution involved somewhere there, outpatient services, whatever that might be. There is usually a payer, different kinds of payers as well in the US, which in a way is part of the model here. And then there are other groups who could be very, very interested. There are groups, there are device makers, there's government bodies who are looking to lower the cost of healthcare. So that value proposition, for some of the best companies that we see, there are different values across those different groups, but they are aligned around the same solution. So make sure that you understand the clinical components there of value against some of the other values that are in place. Explaining how it works can be very simple, it can be very complicated. We chatted, we have a company that we're working with out of Lifespan, who tremendously brilliant solution that's really hard to explain. And so the bulk of the time that we are figuring out how to explain something in a way that will get this individual and this company the second meeting. And in some cases it can be very straightforward, but in others, this is trying to not go too far into the science, but going deep enough for people to understand, okay, I get it. I see where this is fitting in. I see what the improvement is. And in the digital health space, a lot of times these are going to be system solutions. And so showing how, for instance, a digital solution improves the workflow or the system, or is a variant on the system and so forth. This needs to be thought of well, because again, you want people to join you in this journey, and you want them to understand what you're doing, such that they can continue through this this process. The users in healthcare are the healthcare industry is primarily made up of people. And so the users are can become in all different forms at different times, in different ways, etc. And to truly understand the user groups is important. And to understand, you know, that it's more, healthcare is a lot more these days than a patient-physician relationship. There are 70 million caregivers in this country who are caring for somebody either up or down that they love and they want to keep well. And so understanding and talking about, in the context of your solution, how this will affect the relevant stakeholders and users is important. And I should add this to this slide, but as you may or may not know, the FDA's process for product development, digital, diagnostic, or device, is that you start with user needs. It does not start with technology, doesn't start with engineering or regulatory. It starts with user needs. And so the basis of all regulated products is that it's based on the user's requirements. So we've got users, we've got a technology, we've got a value proposition, we've got a good solution. One of the first challenges that you have is that you need to validate something that doesn't exist. And how you go about that is, I think, of all the aspects of developing these products, is perhaps the most difficult, but it is the gate that will allow you then to proceed through to the next round and the next round and the next round after that. There are three different types of validation. One is clinical validation. Does this technology that you're presenting, does that have clinical merit? Will it make something better? Will it make something safer, quicker, whatever? That typically gets validated in a number of different ways. Clinical trials are the one that are best known, but there's a lot of variance on that. Market validation. Market validation is, does somebody want it? Is there somebody there who is going to pay for it? And so this is where that value proposition comes in. And you can go out and you can essentially present a hypothesis to people. And you say, well, you know, if I made this for $9.99, would you buy it? That is the market validation. You want to show that physicians or caregivers or hospital systems or somebody is going to want and recognizes the value in their own construct. And finally, and this is, I think, particularly critical with digital product, is customer validation, is will this technology be used? As you know, a few years ago, there were 450,000 apps on in the App Store, and that there are something like only 100 that actually make any money. I mean, so the numbers are very, very extreme. And so making sure, and the big problem that you have with anything that is on the digital side is often not adoption. People will try anything. It is retention. Is can I demonstrate that I can keep somebody in? And there's a myriad of tricks, and the good news is that you have a particularly vibrant innovation community within 10 miles of where you're all sitting. You can do mock-ups. You've got loads of people who do excellent jobs in digital innovation, developing things that can then be trialed. And there are processes. I want to sort of just recognize that there are processes here that are used and are well-worn roads for how you validate a particular innovation with the customer. So this isn't, there's nothing mysterious about it, but from an investor point of view, they're looking for a validation, clinical, market, and customer validation at some level. And so this slide is really, really important. There's a fellow here in town called Thorne Sparkman, and Thorne, he's etched into my mind the saying, which is he runs the Slater Foundation, which is a group that gives money to early stage startups. And he uses the word, will the dog eat the dog food? So will people buy and use what it is that you have? Competitors and differentiation, again, the digital space is very fast moving right now. I think I said that you know, almost half the product, probably more, of the companies we're working with have a connected component, a digital component, an AI component of some sort. Do not think that you are entirely original. it is highly unlikely that what anybody is doing is highly original. At the same time, it is relatively, I was going to say relatively easily, but I'm going to backtrack off that. It is useful to define, to look at what other people are doing, to look at the market needs and the user needs that you're working around, and to be able to carve out your proposition as separate and more valuable than other people's. So make sure you know who your competitors are, make sure you learn from them, find out how you can go on Crunchbase and you find out how much money they raised, how they did, how they got IP, etc., etc. So you need to have that. You always need to have this particular slide. So you've now got somebody they understand what it is you're doing, they understand why it's important, they understand the technology, and they're still listening, and they're listening, and now they're beginning, you want them to begin to start thinking financially. You are in an industry that it's the largest industry in the world. Is, if you put an umbrella around the US healthcare system, it's 23% of all of our GDP. It's a huge, huge, huge number. And so what you need to be able to do is articulate in one way or another how big the market is that you are working within, and how much of that market your innovation can address. And that is that becomes the basis of your business model. And I have left largely the business model out of this presentation because that would be another 45 minutes. But there are serious components there. But you want everybody to understand it's a big market, the numbers are big, the development, and they will support the development costs and the money that you will be asking for. And within that, if you can show at this point a degree of impact that you can have on that for whatever reason, that you could, then that is really important. The next is regulatory strategy. The regulatory has a slightly it's got a kind of wait and see component when it comes to digital health. It has not been that the FDA is essentially saying, okay, let's see what you've got and we'll sort of figure out where it fits. Regulatory strategy is critical because the difference between one classification and the next classification is often from the point of view of how long something is going to take to develop, if you're going to have to do a clinical trial, if you're going to have to show equivalency, and how much money, therefore, you're going to need to raise. You have to understand your regulatory position. What is very interesting in clinical health a lot of times, and digital health a lot of times, is that a lot of digital products can actually move between different classifications. So we see a lot of companies that are starting with a class 1 510K exempt status, or even below that sometimes, and they then use the data collection process as a class 1 to then be able to upgrade to a class 2. Why do you want to go to a class 2? If you're going to a class 2, you are probably becoming more valuable as a company. And the classifications, I think you all know, are based on the level of risk. But we see companies that are able to get into the market, collect data as they go, and as they make as they process more data, they can then upgrade. which means that they can then make claims. And physicians, hospital systems, insurance companies are interested in a claim. When you make a claim, it is something that you can back up with data that says, if you utilize my product, you will get better faster. You will do something that is beneficial to my health in that process. So this one piece is a must-have from an early stage. And I would just say, do not be scared or put off by the classifications, because they can be the single biggest business benefit that you have is if you can go to the coding groups and say, we can make somebody better faster. We can do such and such. This product is safer, whatever it might be. That is where oftentimes your value will increase as a company a great deal. So again, it needs to be engaged. You need to talk to people who know how to do this, but it will drive your development strategy. Defensibility. In this business, the defensibility is more important than in most. And the reason for that is that an investor who might love what you're doing from a clinical perspective, might love the market opportunity that you've demonstrated and the customer adoption that you believe is available. But those investors know that you have started a relatively long and expensive road, and what protection do these early stage investors have? Very often that defensibility or security is going to be your IP. And if you are able to carve out meaningful IP and meaningful, the broader that you can have that IP, the better. That is something that is nearly always required in most class 1 and class 2 products. And digital health is exactly the same. The sorts of patents that you will get are often different from when I was first in the business. You would look for mechanical patents. Design patents are broadly useless, I'm going to say, they particularly in this space. But mechanical patents really now have given over to system and method patents in this space. And that's that is a gross generalization, but the point is that understanding defensibility is key. Understanding key. All right, all of that will feed into your development path. You need to know where you are in space and time. You need to know how much money is required. If you've got somebody at this point, you've got an investor or somebody who might be a grantor. Investors, if you can get non-dilutive funding through SBIRs and STTRs and so forth, those are investments too. They're just non-dilutive, so they're even better, but they take longer to get. So having a well laid out and pressure tested development strategy and path is really, really important. And this is not, as I said at the beginning, this is not a race. It is something where if you can understand all the components, one of the things I like about this particular category of innovation is that it's really about lining up all your ducks at the beginning of a process, not at the end of a process. And so your development path needs to be understandable. And when somebody walks into NEMIC and they go, oh, I've got a great thing here, it's a class 2 product, we're going to have it on the market by in 8 months, I know right away that they don't understand this business. And because they're not going to have it on the market in 8 months, know and they're going to do it. They're going to crowdfund for it. And they're like, yep, that's not going to happen either. So a development strategy and a well understood milestones are in here as an important moment, because that milestones are typically when you may be able to increase the valuation of the company. And we're working with companies who've come, they're on their 5th funding round, and that's okay, because usually they are in very big businesses. Team is critical. Who's your core team? Who's going to be, most companies in this space end up having a small core team, a development team that might be outsourced to others. Things like quality, clinical, usually outsourced, and lots of advisors. At the end of the day, you're bringing sales, marketing, and operations in later. And so sort of understanding who your team assets are, who you need to have core. We've got a company right here who to this day has raised, I think, 3.5 million. He is through the FDA, he's on the market. He's a one-man band with a hell of a lot of really good advisors, but he's got his sales, marketing, and operations all lined up. People cost money. Being smart about how you contract, how you bring people in, etc., is going to be very, very important. And again, a lot of times, particularly on the East Coast, for some reason, we see a lot of virtual development in this space. There is no way, nobody's going to go out and hire, can afford to hire a good regulatory person full-time at the get-go, and they shouldn't. Finally, you're going to bring all this together into there will be a money slide. The money slide is how much have I raised in the past? What sort of SBIRs have you had? What are you looking for now? How are you going to spend it? Total use, and the who might be acquiring you. The minute you get non-dilutive funding, you get equity funding, you will have individuals and angel groups kind of drumming their fingers a little bit and waiting patiently. They have a calculus, which is very simple. I'm going to give you $10,000 with the belief and hope that you will give me $100,000, 10x that, back within 5 years. That's the calculus. And so this cadence and this narrative form is all coming through to this. Have you convinced somebody that you are worthy CEO who will be bringing money back to the table based on the bet that they have made on you and your company and your intervention and so forth? And that's the hard fact. And if that clock starts ticking. We've got a lovely company here at NEMIC called Resuscitech, which came out of Brown. Super simple digital health product. It uses the accelerometer in this thing, and these guys are one of the very few. I have to give them a hell of a lot of credit. They are one of the very few. They are now in profit, and they haven't raised a dime, but they won a lot of competition, used it really, really, really well. And we had somebody in here last week, and we had a meeting with them and some investors. And the investors were keen to invest. And our advice was, if you can continue without bringing in investment, you should, because that clock won't start ticking, and you can continue to build out your business. That was, I think I nailed it. I went 1 minute over, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions, and I hope that was useful. I believe we've got a deck that is the full format that we can provide, and I will just say at the end of this that we talk to everybody. So we're happy if you want to come in and show us what you're thinking about, we would go under an NDA with you and we would go from there. So any questions, thoughts, etc.?
Thank you so much, Aidan, for that presentation. We do have just around 15 minutes for question and answer, so I will invite folks to either chat their questions or raise your virtual hand and we can call on you and you can unmute and ask your question. But now is the time to jump into it, get more details about your own pitch plans. One thing to start us off is someone did ask questions about the programs offered at NEMIC. So if you do want to go into a little bit of detail about what kind of, I guess, the ongoing programs that you provide.
Sure. The big one is the MedTech Leadership Program, and this was really our answer to really covering the knowledge gaps that I had seen, and then we did a lot of research to essentially fill out the knowledge gaps, and that is a program that we run every fall. I think it starts in I'm going to say November. It is a pretty significant, I think it's 57 hours, but we try and make it really fun as well. We try and make everything fun. It is taught entirely by professionals, and I think we have 23 or 26 different individuals coming in and going through that class. We also run we're running an accelerator right now, which is focused on health equity, and we look for business and entrepreneurs who have a focus on in areas of where the health has not been delivered as consistently and well, which takes us into some very important areas. We also, I think, are about to announce a program called Activate, which we have run, is that right? Yeah. Which we run 3 times. This is a grant program where it's a combination of the NEMIC team and then some of our advisory team, and we have money, I think it goes up to 10,000 or something like that, that we can then spend on things that are needed, like developing a regulatory strategy or understanding IP or whatever those things might be. We are on the verge of presenting online courses, which I think will be available. Okay, I just got in the summer, and this is the basis, and can be they can be consumed in different ways. It's basically the leadership program, but we tried to make it not a lecture series, something that's a bit more fun. At the end of the day, though, when those are sort of formal learning activities, and then we will, if you have something and you just want to come in and chat and have a kind of a reality check or whatever, we'll talk to everybody once, and then if we can fit them into a program, the Magpie, if you're at a point that you're ready for funding, Magpie is a great, I think it's Magpie MedTech Ventures, and that comes with money and education, and it's a really good program that sits on top of NEMIC. We've got a very good physician group. It's only 7 people, and so we can move quite nimbly.
Thank you for sharing the details on the many different ongoing programs at NEMIC. We can follow up in the email that goes out after this with the recording, more details about how you can get involved, who you can get in contact with, etc. I did get a question from someone asking how you might adjust a pitch deck for a service like online educational videos, as opposed to the products that we kind of talked through at the beginning of this presentation.
I think a lot of it will be the format that is added here is mostly things like the regulatory. And if you're not falling into regulatory, then you take the slide out. I do think that a lot of the pieces like value proposition that make sure that you've got alignment about stakeholder groups is really important. IP, or if it's a service, sometimes that's going to come under copyright. You know, there are other ways that you can protect. But that general kind of what it is you're trying to do, that cadence is usually pretty solid. And then if some truly don't apply, then you drop them out.
Thank you. You shared a bit of detail about this value proposition question, which, and as you mentioned, is the more challenging of the slides to prove when you're early on. Can you speak a little bit to how that might evolve over time, what an early value proposition might look like compared with something that has a little bit more testing and research completed?
Just say the last piece of that again.
Yeah, so how does a value proposition maybe evolve? What does it look like from the very beginning when you're in the earlier phases versus as you go on and you have more time to develop evidence of the value?
Well, what at a high level, what I think is very interesting about this with digital health is you can usually define the value proposition for the stakeholders very early, and it shouldn't evolve over time. And if I don't want to go too deep into the nuances of medical device development, but if there is a point at which you have to freeze development. You can't just sort of iterate as you would in the consumer markets. You have to freeze it because the FDA wants to know what you're actually bringing to market. You can't just change it. But that the value proposition, the second class we give is a workshop, because not a class, it's a workshop on value proposition, and really getting, when you start thinking about who would value your particular technology, it can take you down some really interesting streets. And that because there are so many different payers, and I could give an illustration, we don't have time now, for how one company provided multiple different value propositions to multiple acquirers with the same exact thing, and they all valued, the value to each of them was different. What a drug company might see as highly valuable with a digital proposition could be completely different from an insurance company, but no less valuable. And the key is to convert that, to understand what parts are just pieces that make the world a better place, and what parts are the ones that people will pay for. Because very rarely does a patient pay for anything. Well, beg your pardon. They pay for it, but they just pay for it through a rather convoluted mechanism.
Thank you. I got another question here. So for pitches that are 20 minutes versus 1 minute long, which elements are more flexible or could be foregone or cut back for a shorter pitch?
This is probably, so when if you have to do a 1 minute, and I think everybody should be able to do a 1 minute, you're really in the hook. It's anything that's a hook. So if you imagine the use of language, you're saying I've developed a revolutionary, which means it's big, a revolutionary digital product that will make the world a better place, and by doing such and such and such and such, and the revenue model is mind-blowing. You know, you're going to use that sort of, so you're going to, because again, all you're trying to do, if you imagine you're in an elevator, the CEO of a big investor gets in, and he says, "Hey, Alison, what are you up to lately?" And you say, "Well, oddly enough, I'm doing the following," and then with the goal of him saying, "Well, come up to my office. I want to hear more." So a lot of times, all you're doing at these early stages, all you want somebody to say is, that's interesting, I'd like to hear more. And when I say that there are companies that we've seen again and again and again and again, we've got companies here who are pitching, they've gone from the seed, the magpie type investments, they've gone up to the cherry stone and the angel investors. Now they're getting into the micro VCs, and eventually they're going to be with the growth capital people who are coming in, and they're not looking for 10x, they're looking for 3x, but they're looking for something that's substantially de-risked. So all of those, having that practice to say what it is you're doing in a way that is understandable, interesting, and valuable is a trick worth practicing. It's not a trick. I mean,
So practice is perfect. We have another question in the chat here. You mentioned that it's important to have IP sorted out before pitching to investors, but I've heard it can be hard to carve out a patent for software or services. Would a copyright be considered strong enough IP for investors when pitching a software or algorithm type of innovation?
Probably not. It might be, and the answer is it depends. That the copyright would have to be incredibly tightly tied to the clinical benefit. And so if you can do that, then yes, maybe. But you've then got to make sure, and what happens is you then got to usually spend an awful lot of time on marketing, whereas if you've got IP, you don't have to do so much marketing because you've got something that is solid and protectable. You can take this sort of slower path. And yeah, so the copyrights are, they would have to be very, very specific. And it is a challenge with digital product as to how you can protect it. I mean, it's completely doable. And what I do think, and with the companies we're working with right now, if you can tie the specificity of your intervention to the FDA, and you can say, I took this through the FDA, this exact thing, because of the way the FDA works, the FDA can actually become your protection, and anybody else who's going to chase you or going to compete with you would have to go through the FDA. So, you know, thinking about defensibility is a lot of these are just sort of like great intellectual exercises to say, okay, I probably don't have that route, but if I can make a claim for such and such and I can defend it, then that could be my protection, because you've now forced anybody else who wants to make that claim has now got to go through the FDA as well.
Thank you. So I'm noticing that the time, we're right at 2 o'clock. I want to say thank you so much to our speaker for joining us today, for all of your expertise and insight on the pitch decks. We will be sending out a follow-up email with access to the recording, as well as another link, a copy of the link to the downloadable template that was provided. We do appreciate everyone's feedback. Would love to hear from you all. So if you have a moment, please complete the survey that was linked in the chat. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for our last session in the Digital Health Commercialization Series, and we hope to see you all at our next event or program. Thank you all so much.